Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's Medical Center Hour. I'm Marcia Day-Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities, and really pleased to see all of you here today. We live in times when empathy seems in short supply. At the same time, this ability to imagine how it feels to be inside the skin of another seems more needed than ever to help us bridge difference, discover common ground, share burdens, overcome aloneness, create community, refresh or restore our humanity and that of others. As a writer of poetry and memoir, Mark Doty believes that literature is one of the most powerful tools we have to foster empathy and to come close to the subjectivity of another person. He appreciates as well that the practice of medicine, too, is a work of profound knowing, of learning who someone is, what they need, and how they might be healed. Hence his coming to speak at this Medical Center Hour. It's been the University of Virginia's great good fortune this fall to have Mark Doty on grounds as the Cabinet's Distinguished Writer in Residence. And it's the medical school and health system's good fortune that he's come across Hospital Drive from the English department to explore with our healthcare community the ways that both poetry and medicine help us to know one another and indeed can help us to heal. Having been introduced today to Mark Doty and his work, we hope you can also attend his trio of upcoming lectures that rounds out his Cabinet residency. The 3 lectures which are mentioned in your handout at the end of Mr. Doty's biographical sketch are on compassion, which I dare say is something we'll encounter with him now as he asks, how can I meet you? Knowing each other through poetry and medicine. Today's program is offered in partnership with the Creative Writing Program in the Department of English, and we're also pleased that the UVA bookstore is here with a selection of Mark Doty's books for sale and for his signing following the program. I'd also like to add that Mark Doty had no financial conflicts of interest to disclose. So here he is, and I dare say you're in for a wonderful hour. We are in for a wonderful hour with him. Welcome, Mark.
I can also tell you that this program is entirely not approved by the FDA. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I feel enormously fortunate to be a visiting writer at UVA this term, in part because of the strength of the creative writing program, wonderful colleagues and extraordinary students, and in part because, although it might not initially seem to be so, to be in Charlottesville at this moment seems to me to be standing in a particular place in American history where I would like to have my eyes open, so I'm grateful for that. I have always felt that when we say that creative writing, the writing of poetry, fiction, or memoir, is expression, the expression of something that we feel or that we think, that there's something not quite true about that. That rather than self-expression, writing has always seemed to me an act of inquiry, where I could go to figure out what I feel and figure out what I think. There's a famous saying in composition theory, how do I know what I think until I see what I say? Until the words are there in front of me, how can you gain access to an inner life? I was very fortunate as a young man because I was scribbling away, trying to make sense out of a very complicated inner life growing up as a gay boy in an alcoholic family in Tucson, Arizona in the late 60s. I met a poet who did something for me that was far beyond mentorship. He was the director of the University of Arizona Poetry Center, which was a beautiful old adobe house. It was lined with books and a non-circulating library. There were broadsides, hand-printed poems, there were photographs of poets, tape recordings. And he welcomed me into that place. He talked about the life of writing, the life of being part of a community of poets, as if he were gossiping about his friends, some of whom had been dead for 500 years. He lived in the flux of their work, in thinking about that language and how it described experience. I felt that he was inviting me in, not only to the Poetry Center, but into a community I could join at a point when I felt there weren't that many communities available to me. So it was a great support for this sense that writing could be an ongoing practice of finding out how to say who you are, finding out what you have to say about who you are. I learned later how useful this notion was to me as a teacher, particularly when I was teaching composition at a 2-year community college in Iowa, and most of my students were nurses. I didn't understand that they would be people who would bring to our expository writing class the greatest urgency, the greatest sense of necessity. For them, there really was no point in writing what was not commensurate with the intensity and difficulty of their experience. People who sort of stood at a brink, stood as witnesses, day after day, night after night. For them, writing to understand what they were experiencing, writing to give shape to it, to plumb the depths of feeling, was not just something you do for a requirement, not simply an academic practice, but really a door into a deeper awareness to living one's life more completely and more fully. I was never more grateful for this practice when I stepped into the deepest crisis of my life. In 1987, my partner Wally Roberts and I were living in Vermont. We were the only out gay couple in Montpelier, Vermont, town of 8,000 people. It was a little tense, very beautiful place, but homogenous. We had been to visit friends in San Francisco and learned that taking the HIV test was becoming a recommended practice, although in those days, what it meant to test positive was really not very clear. There was not a specific regimen of treatment available. There was not certainty that you would develop an opportunistic infection. One's fate was unclear. But it was also clear that if you were positive, the moral sword that hangs over all our heads was that much lower. So when we came back from San Francisco, we took the test. And I want to read you a passage from this book, Heaven's Coast, which is a memoir of Wally's illness and death and the year thereafter. At 9 o'clock on a weekday morning, late in May of 1989, a public health care worker who'd come to tell us our test results blasted the world apart. I can't say I remember the experience all that clearly, so much did it become a kind of whirlwind. She was poised on the edge of the couch, practiced, friendly in a rather formal way. She told us our results, me first, then Wally. I remember going and standing beside him. He was sitting in a wing chair. I don't remember if he was crying, but I remember the stunned aura around him, the sense of an enormous rupture. Not a surprise, but nonetheless a horror, an announcement, fundamentally, inadmissibly, unacceptable. Shattering, but not a surprise, for we had been thinking of anything else. And though she must have told me my status first in order to deliver good news before the blow, I remember thinking it didn't matter which of us it was, that his news was mine. At that time, testing was offered by the state, and after a 3-week wait, one arranged to meet the caseworker someplace, often secretively, in parking lots or cafes to protect the identities of closeted people, to avoid the brand of difference and contagion. I think she offered us a few phone numbers, a clinic in Burlington, the phone number of Vermont Cares, a fledgling support group 40 miles down the road. The phone numbers and information flapped in the void, little wings in a great tornado. Where were we then? In air? In limbo? In a not knowing more darkened by contingency than anything we'd ever known? We drove to Burlington. It was a glorious, dense green spring in Vermont, but it could have been anywhere. There wasn't anything outside our known sphere. Inside the car, we held hands as I drove, talking or not talking, I don't recall. A blur of green outside, shreds of fog, I think, on the mountains, and the almost impossible green valleys between them. The palpable wounded shock inside. We went to a support group office that day, signed up, took home brochures. I remember crying in a Szechuan restaurant, Wally's hand shaking as he lifted his water glass. We were inside a zone of silence. We could talk and still not violate it, even in a crowded room full of carved dragons and people chattering over business lunches. Perhaps we looked as if nothing had changed, so that no one would know we had entered that morning into the rest of our lives, into the harrowing, forward-pouring next. Well, there wasn't a lot for us to do in terms of treatment, but one thing we could do is make some plans about how to live in whatever time was remaining. At that time, there were maybe 7 cases of AIDS in Vermont. There were no services. Through a highly unlikely arrangement, I managed to get a job at Sarah Lawrence College in New York. I could commute there. I could drive down once a week, stay a couple of days and teach, and drive back. We found an apartment in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which was the most welcoming community we could locate, a very large artist colony for the last 100 years, and therefore large gay and lesbian population, hard hit by the epidemic. We moved, which was the best decision we could possibly have made because there was a community around us. There was help, and there was, for a while, a considerable pleasure in being in a place of less difficulty, less tension in the remaining years of his life. So, 2 things were happening for me at the same time. The person that I loved, that I believed I would be with for the rest of my life, was beginning to disappear. And at the same time, what I was seeing around me, we read the newspaper, we watched television, the narrative of what our lives, my community's life is like, didn't match up. I saw there represented abandoned men, people who were socially exiled, unwelcome, diseased, often blamed. I saw in my community incredible heroism, people coming together to help strangers, raising money, making services, at a time when there was so little knowledge, so little hope, really. So people did extraordinary things to help each other out. So I want to read you a few poems that come out of that time. I felt a great pressure both to articulate what I was feeling, discover what I was feeling, and also to represent some aspects of the community that were not otherwise visible. So this poem comes out of the story of friends Holly. She was a woman who was comfortably retired, wrote poetry, did bird watching, and took a notion that she'd like to be a volunteer for a guy who was living with AIDS. So she began to visit this fellow once a week and then twice a week, soon every day. And when he died, she formed another such relationship and eventually became a director of volunteer training for the state. This is called Brilliance. Maggie's taking care of a man who's dying. He's attended to everything, said goodbye to his parents, paid off his credit card. She says, why don't you just run it up to the limit? But he wants everything squared away. No balance owed, though he misses the pets he's already found a home for. He can't be around dogs or cats, too much risk. He says, I can't have anything. She says, a bowl of goldfish? He says he doesn't want to start with anything, and then describes the kind he maybe like, how their tails would fan to a gold flaring. They talk about hot jewel tones, gold lacquer, saying maybe they'll go pick some out, though he can't go much of anywhere. And then abruptly he says, I can't love anything, I can't finish. He says it like he's had enough of the whole scintillant world. But what he means is he'll never be satisfied, and therefore has established this discipline, a kind of severe rehearsal. That's where they leave it, him looking out the window, her knitting as she does because she needs to do something. Later he leaves a message, yes to the bowl of goldfish, meaning, let me go, if I have to, in brilliance. In a story I read, a Zen master who perfected his detachment from the things of the world remembered at the moment of dying a deer he used to feed in the park and wondered who might care for it, and at that instant was reborn in the stunned flesh of a fawn. So, Maggie's friend, is he going out into the last loved object of his attention, fanning the vain translucence of an opulent tail, undulant in some uncapturable curve? Is he bronze chrysanthemums, copper leaf, hurried darting, doubloons, icon-colored fins troubling the water? Of course, when self is a fleeting thing, a fragile thing, then we have to start asking, well, what was it to begin with? What is this bundle of energy, this knot of consciousness, this spot of brightness in a field of brightness that we are? Wally developed a condition called PML, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, which basically no longer exists. It is so controlled by protease inhibitors that to be gone. It is a bug in the liver that would migrate into the brain and cause a kind of gradual paralysis. And thank God, brings with it a funny kind of peace. Wally would, if I thought I could walk, if I was stuck in bed, he was never in the hospital because there was really nothing to do. He was simply there at home with his dogs and his cats, watching the same episode of The Golden Girls 4 times in a row and laughing at the same jokes every time he can remember them. He was fine. His family couldn't believe he wasn't in the hospital, but there was no reason to be. This is called reprieve. I woke in the night and thought it was a dream. Nothing has torn the future apart. We have not lived years in dread. It never happened. I dreamed it all. And then there was this sensation of terrific pressure lifting, as if I were rising in one of those old diving bells, lightening, unburdening. I didn't know how heavy my life had become. So much fear, so little knowledge. It was like being young again, but I understood how light I was, how without encumbrance. And so I felt both young and awake, which I never felt when I was young. The curtains moved. It was still summer. All the windows open. And I thought, I can move that easily. I thought my dream had lasted for years, a decade. A dream can seem like that. I thought there's so much more time. And then, of course, the truth came floating back to me. You know how children love to end stories they tell by saying, it was all a dream? Years ago, when I taught kids to write, I used to tell them this ending spoiled things, explaining and dismissing what had come before. Now I know how wise they were to prefer that gesture of closure, their stories rounded not with sleep, but a waking. What other gift comes close to a reprieve? This was a dream that Wally told me. I was in the tunnel, he said, and there really was a light at the end, and a great being standing in the light. His arms were full of people, men and women, but his proportions were all just right. I mean, he was the size of you and me. And the people said, come with us, we're going dancing. And they seemed so glad to be going, and so glad to have me join them, but I said, I'm not ready yet. I didn't know what to do when he finished, except hold the relentless weight of him. I didn't know what to say, except it was a dream. Nothing's wrong now. It was only a dream. So just one more from this series. The characters you'll meet in this poem are some friends and 2 dogs. It's called New Dog. Jimmy and Tony can't keep Dino, their Cocker Spaniel. Tony's too sick. The daily walk's more pressure than pleasure, one more obligation that can't be met. And though we already have a dog, Wally wants to adopt, wants something small and golden to sleep next to him and lick his face. He's paralyzed now from the waist down. Whatever's ruining him, moving upward, and we don't know how much longer he'll be able to pet a dog. How many men want another attachment, just as they're leaving the world? Wally sits up nights and says, I'd like some lizards, a talking bird, some fish, a little rat. So after I drive to Jimmy and Tony's in the village, and they meet me at the door and say, we can't go through with it, we can't give up our dog, I drive to the shelter just to look, and there is Bo, bounding and practically boundless, one brass concatenation of tongue and tail, unmediated energy, too big, wild, perfect. He not only licks Wally's face, but bathes every irreplaceable inch of his head. And though Wally can no longer feed himself, he can lift his hand and bring it to rest on the rough gilt flanks when they are, for a moment, still. I have never seen a touch so deliberate. It isn't about grasping. The hand itself seems almost blurred now, softened, though tentative only because so much will must be summoned. Such attention brought to the work, which is all he is now. This gesture toward the restless splendor, the unruly, the golden, the animal, the new. So I thought that I was adopting this unbelievably undisciplined golden retriever for Wally's benefit, Wally lived for about 6 weeks. After Bo came home with us, when Bo walked into the house, Wally had just been made a big breakfast by the home health aide, scrambled eggs and bacon, and Bo leapt up and ate it. So it was a bit of work, and my friends thought, what are you doing? You're insane to be doing this. I realized when Wally died that the dog wasn't for him. That was for me. It was a creature who didn't know anything about grief, and who needed to walk, and needed to eat, and needed to play, and his life kept going. So those poems try to talk about these experiences directly, telling stories about the community and what happened to us. I want to read you something that behaves a little differently and uses metaphor. You know, there are things that you can't say plainly, right? And you need to come out, from some other direction. The children at the elementary school in our town had a garden, vegetable garden, flower garden outside school. And you could, when school was out, you could rent a plot. I had a garden plot there. In the community garden. It's almost over now, late summer's accomplishment. And I can stand face to face with this music. Eye to seed-paved eye with the sunflower's architecture. Such muscular leaves, the thick stems surge. Though some are still shiningly confident, others can barely hold their heads up. Their great leaves wrap the stalks like lowered shields. This one shrugs its shoulders. This one's in a rush to be nothing but form. Even at their zenith, you could see beneath the gold they'd come to. So what's the use of elegy? If their work is this skyrocket passage through the world, is it mine to lament them? Do you think they'd want to bloom forever? It's the trajectory they desire. Believe me, they do desire. You could say they are, one intent, finally, to be this leaping green, this bronze haze bending down. How could they stand apart from themselves and regret their passing when they are a field of lifting and bowing faces, faces ringed in flames? So, something happened a few months after Wally's death, which was profoundly disturbing to me, which was that I could not picture his face. And I couldn't hear his voice. And I thought maybe it was because, you know, when we're with someone every day, they sort of become a part of your subjectivity, and you don't see them as separate from you exactly. And I was so upset by this because I thought that it meant I'd lost him again. And then came a dream. And when I had finished this poem, I sent it off to an editor I knew, and he liked the poem. He said, and by the way, I had that dream too. And he said, and I showed the poem to my friend John, and John had that dream too. I had no idea. And over the years of reading this poem to audiences, I've discovered how common this experience is and how profound it is for us. The embrace. You weren't well or really ill yet either, just a little tired, your handsomeness tinged by grief or anticipation, which brought to your face a thoughtful, deepening grace. I didn't for a moment doubt you were dead. I knew that to be true still, even in the dream. You'd been out at work maybe, having a good day, almost energetic. We seemed to be moving from some old house where we'd lived, boxes everywhere, things in disarray. That was the story of my dream. But even asleep, I was shocked out of narrative by your face, the physical fact of your face, inches from mine, smooth-shaven, loving, alert. Why so difficult, remembering the actual look of you, without a photograph, without a strain? So when I saw your unguarded, reliable face, your unmistakable gaze opening all the warmth and clarity of you, warm brown tea, we held each other for the time the dream allowed. Bless you. You came back, so I could see you once more, plainly, so I could rest against you without thinking this happiness lessened anything, without thinking you were alive again. There is a sonnet of John Milton's, I dreamed I saw my late spouse's wife. When he sees his wife in a dream after her death. And when he awakes, he's devastated because there she's gone. So it seemed that the profound gift of this dream was knowing that he was dead from the very beginning, so that we could be reunited, but that loss would not return. Okay. So I want to, two things. When life changed, when hope appeared in the form of new medications, incredibly transformative time. And everyone I knew who had been, which is basically everyone I knew, had been a caregiver of some kind. And suddenly, we could set something down, completely shell-shocked, numb, inarticulate. And during that time, I wrote this book. I don't know what people who are mourning do if they don't write books. What you got? I feel you have to make something to contain this. So this book was written as a kind of almost a daily meditation, watching myself in grief, pouring it out onto the page, letting myself say everything, and then cutting it way, way back, because the thing was enormous at some point. I was very lucky that a very good editor was involved early on in the process, waiting to read it when I was done. When the book came out, I went on a book tour, and the first stop was in a big Barnes & Noble in Upper Manhattan, and I read from the book, and I got through it without falling apart, and then it's time for questions, and the first question was, so what do you think happens to us when we die? I wasn't prepared to be a grief expert or a metaphysician, so I had to negotiate that. And then I went to San Francisco. It was a book fair that was happening at a big expo hall, and read from the book, and came down to sign them, and was looking at a line of hundreds of people holding a hardcover version of this with such presence and emotional fixity, because we were living with this reservoir of untapped grief. And I have never in my life seen, at least seen personally, people so eager to take something, to take a text that they could use. Poets do not grow up believing that anybody will read them, much less make use of what they do. To grow up as a poet in this country is to feel, it's changing a little bit, but sort of on some edge, or doing a kind of private practice. So for me to learn that art of all kinds is something which helps people live, which helps us to stand through difficult times and think about how we might step forward, was an extraordinary thing. My work has moved on in terms of content, but of course the news is Evanescence doesn't change. We are poor passing facts, as the poet Robert Lowell put it. We disappear, but we love vanishes, and that continues to be the powerful current for me. I thought that I would end with a couple of poems that do some quite different things than the ones you just heard. How are you doing? Okay?
We're fine.
One of the things that I have wanted to talk about, and you can hear that in some of those poems about the epidemics, talk about social justice, the ways in which it's easy for those on the margins at the bottom to disappear. This is a poem which wants to talk back to racially motivated violence on the part of our law enforcement officials. We have seen such horrifying evidence of that in recent years. The poem remembers Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old boy who was shot in Cleveland, Ohio. He was playing with a toy gun in City Park. And Marcia very, very kindly mentioned empathy in introducing me. This is a poem that is struggling with empathy. What do you do when you're confronted with an act of violence? To what extent can we be empathic to the perpetrator of that violence? In 2 seconds, Tamir Rice, 2002 to 2014. In 2 seconds, the boy's face climbed back down the 12-year tunnel of its becoming, a charcoal sunflower swallowing itself. Who has eyes to see or ears to hear? If you could see what happens fastest, unmaking the human irreplaceable, a star falling into complete gravitational darkness from all points of itself, all this, the held, loved body, into which entered milk and music, honeying the cells of him, who sang to him, stroked the nape of the scalp, kissed the flesh knot after the cord completed its work of fueling into him the long history of those whose suffering was made more bearable by the as yet unknown of him, playing alone in some unthinkable future city, a Cleveland, whatever that might be. 2 seconds to elapse. The arc of joy in the conception bed, the labor of hands repeated until the hands no longer required attention, so that as the woman folded, her hopes for him sank into the fabric of his shirts and underpants. Down they go, swirling down into the maw of the greater dark. Treasure box, comic books, pocket knife, bell from a lost cat's collar. Why even begin to enumerate them when behind every tributary poured into him comes rushing backward all he hasn't been yet? Everything that boy could have thought or made, sung or theorized, built on the quavering but continuous structure that had preceded him, sank into an absence in the shape of a boy playing with a plastic gun in a city park in Ohio in the middle of the afternoon. When I said 2 seconds, I don't mean the time it took him to die. I mean the lapse between the instant the cruiser braked to a halt on the grass, between that moment and the one in which the officer fired his weapon. The 2 seconds taken to assess the situation. And though I believe it is the work of art to try on at least the moment and skin of another, for this hour I respectfully decline. I refuse it. May that officer be visited every night of his life by an enormity collapsing in front of him into an incomprehensible gloom, and the voice that howls out of it. If this is no poem, then but that voice, erased boy, beloved of time, who did nothing to no one and became nothing because of it, I know that voice is one of the things we call poetry. It isn't to his killer he's speaking. So this is going to be a strange transition, but I've read you a lot of very heavy poems, and I thought I would end on a lighter note. I have most, as you know from hearing about Bo, other dogs and I at work, I've been living with big dogs most of my life. And in recent years, a new relationship brought a terrier into the family. And this is like a Martian up here. You know, something was beamed down. This is called Little George. Barks at whatever's not the world as he prefers to know it. Trash sacks, hand trucks, black hats, canes and hoods, bicycles, snow shovels, someone smoking a joint beneath the overhang of the Haitian evangelicals, anyone, how dare they, walking a dog. George barks, the tense white comma of himself arced in alarm. At home, he floats in the creaturely domestic, curled in the triangle behind a sleeper's knees, wiggling on his back on the sofa, all jelly and sighs, receiving a belly rub. No worries. But outside the apartment's metal door, the unmanageable day assumes its blurred and infinite disguises. Best to bark. No matter that he's slightly larger than a toaster. He proceeds as if he rules a rectangle 2 blocks deep, bounded west and east by 7th Avenue and Union Square. Whatever's there is there by his consent, and subject to the rebuke of his refusal. Though when he asserts his will, he trembles. If only he were not solely responsible for raising outcry at any ripple of trouble on West 16th, or if right out on the pavement he might lay down the clanking armor of his bluster. Some evening, when he's climbed the stairs after our late walk, and rounds the landing's turn and turns his way toward his steady sleep, I wish he might be visited by a dream of the world as kind. How any looming unreadable might turn out to hold the April green of an unsullied tennis ball. Dear one, surely the future is not entirely out to get us. And if it is, barking won't help much. But no such luck. At least not yet. He takes umbrage this morning at a stone image serene in a neighbor's garden, and stiffens and fixes and sounds his wild alarm. Damn you, Buddha, get out of here. Go away. Thank you. So, that starts out in a lighter place, but poetry's character is to keep diving. Huh? And so I thought that I was writing a portrait of George, and then I realized after a while, oh, I've actually written a portrait of my partner, who's a little doubtful about the future. And then I realized, no, it's really about me. It's really about how we expect, what we think the world will offer us. Is it possible at this moment to dream of the world as kind? That the future will be bringing us something we really want? I hope so. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd be happy to address any questions or anything you'd like to talk about.
Thank you so much for your poems and your other wonderful words and your thoughts. We have a generous amount of time. We have a couple of microphones. So please wait to ask your question or make your comment until a mic can be brought to you. And when you do have a mic, please identify yourself. And so the floor is open, and we have a nice amount of time for conversation.
Hi. In the poem about, I'm Doty Esselstyn, a nurse practitioner, poet wannabe. In the poem about Tamir Rice, was that a poem you felt you needed to write or you should write?
I felt I needed to write it. I don't know that there is more of such violence than there has been in the past, or if the availability of the technology to videotape is what has changed. But the visibility of this in recent years has been so profoundly disturbing to me. And the idea of this child, simply, why do I? Two friends of mine, Marie Howe and Tina Chang, who are both New York poets, organized an event which was to be at Washington Square, and poets were invited to read poems around these issues of violence. The event was called I Can't Breathe. And it was a fascinating time. It was very cold. There were 60 poets there. There was no audience. We just read to each other. And while we were reading, this young Latino cop comes up to me and says, "What's going on here?" And I said, "Well, we're reading poems about racially motivated violence on the part of the police." And he said, "Good." That's about it. I so much wanted to be part of that, and I wanted to lend my voice to it. But the struggle for me was, I don't know Tamir Rice. No connection. And it would feel presumptuous to claim that I could. The candle to me, and I struggled with this for days and days before I finally started to get into the poem, was thinking about time and the way that when he died, all that had poured into him comes to a halt, and everything that would have emerged from him comes to a halt. There's this kind of implosion. I mean, any death is that in a way. But so much carrying, that small body, carrying so much of past and future. And my work is often obsessed with time. What is it? How do we contend with it? How do we think about it? And so that gave me a means of approach. And you'll notice that in the poem, the details about him are extremely generic. Bell from a lost cat's collar. There's very little about him as a person, because he is, in the poem, being an instance of what happens at a time when a life is interrupted. And in a way, I guess the answer is both. I mean, I really needed to write it, but I still think, I'm really weary of the idea of writing about race being the problem of poets of color. I think racism distorts every life in this country. It damages us. It limits us. And we need to share the responsibility for addressing it. I don't mean that poems change it, but they do something. That they provoke our thinking, right? They serve as catalysts for awareness. They make connections between people who share a common pain or concern.
Just a quick comment. In the Tamir Rice poem, you describe him at one point as a dark sunflower. Mm-hmm. And you read us an earlier poem which included beautiful description of sunflowers. And I'm reminded also that in your book, The Art of Description, you work with about 4 or 5 different poets' takes on sunflowers. And
right.
They obviously mean something to you.
Well, they're so vital. Yeah. They have such a and their presence is, there's some echo of the human, right? The stalk with its bilateral symmetry and the great face that is so expressive. And sunflowers move through the arc of time almost like nothing else. And there's that little seed in May, and then by September, there's that thing that's 12 feet tall, that blazing great face. I think they're just enormously compelling to me. And I like the way, as in the poem that you referenced, The Community Garden, there are sunflowers that are hunched over and done, and there are others that are just coming into being. It's as if you can see a sort of simultaneity spread out in front of you. All these lines rising and falling. If we could stand back from the world, well, we don't stand back very far. It's what we see, isn't it? People coming into being, passing away, flowering and fading. There's a fabulous painter. If you Google this guy's name, is Jimmy Wright. He does mostly pastels of sunflowers that express every emotion you can think of. There are furious sunflowers, raging ones, utterly desolate ones, melancholic sunflowers. They're totally fascinating. And of course, there was that Van Gogh guy. Pretty amazing things with him, too.
Hi, Mark. I'm Deborah Nystrom from Creative Writing. So just before you leave the Tamir Rice discussion, with that poem and what you said about the writing of it is such a beautiful example of managing the thing I want to ask about. But there's maybe more than ever recently a kind of anxiety on the part of writers in terms of how to manage the continuum between empathy and appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered, if there's more you want to say about
Sure.
that. And I would think it's probably of interest in medicine, just how much one can assume and how much one shouldn't assume.
It seems like we always have to proceed with caution in saying, I know how you feel. I understand what it's like to be you. I mean, we don't. But the marvel of language is that, despite the fact that, post-structuralism teaches us that we can't rely on words to say what we mean, people somehow or other manage to put them together in ways which convey feeling, which we get something of the texture of another person's way of inhabiting the world. And, when I talked about my teacher who would gossip about kids, it really was as if what had been made in language, as what Whitman said, distance availed not, time availed not. They could have, those words could have such a quality of life about them through their sonic textures, their rhythms, their imagery, that they conveyed a sense of vitality. And so you get Du Fu is talking to you 1,000 years later. How is this possible? I don't know, but it is. So, poetry does that. Our daily conversation does it a lot less, right? And those of you who are medical practitioners know when you ask somebody how they are not going to answer you as if they were Robert Lowell or Edwin Rich describing their condition, right? You're going to get language that's less precise and less evocative. Maybe one of the uses of poetry is looking for, helping us to find that precision and detailed speech. So I think we have to proceed carefully, but I also think that it's a mistake to be afraid of appropriation. That word seems to me much overused. Like, what's so bad about trying to really put yourself into somebody else's skin and maybe failing? I'd rather you failed than you didn't do it at all, right? It's also, this is a hybrid world. And you show me something that is not in some way blended or borrows from or makes use of what comes from another culture or another part of the forest. It just doesn't exist, right? So here's an example. I got very much taken to task by a young Asian American poet for an essay I'd written about a poem in which there's a white man who has his eyes surgically altered so that he can perform as an Asian woman. And it's a kind of celebration of this character. So I was trying to defend the poem, and then I saw that the critic was doing drag videos in which he channels Beyoncé. It's like, wait a minute. You can perform as Beyoncé, but you can't. So, when people yell about appropriation, I think usually protesting too much.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in the point of view of the speaker in your poems, because that whoever is speaking seems to be inside and outside at the same time, and more than 360 degrees, because there's time involved. Is that deliberate, or do you just let the poem figure that out?
I think that singular perspective, in terms of if I am only in the now, looking directly at what's in front of me, I can only give you a dimension, right? And if I can step outside of that time frame a little bit and also look, or I can circle the subject, or I can be a you and an I, something else happens. And that dimensionality feels really important to me. Does that make any sense? Yeah, I don't know how else to explain that. It's partly about how I try to think about who I'm talking to in the poem. Because if I want you to be surrounded by an experience or step into an experience that is dimensional in time and space. And that means I have to, let's spin it a little.
I mean, I think if a poet is trying to say the unsayable, then it becomes necessary.
You need all your resources
Yeah.
to do this impossible thing. When I was a kid, as a teenager, you could send off $5 to a commune in New Mexico, and you would get back a book called Be Here Now by Ram Dass. It was like hand printed with rubber stamps, and it was the most beautiful thing. And I still have this. And on the cover was a mandala. It was a ring of flame, and in the ring of flame is an old-fashioned bentwood chair, empty, meaning you could come sit here. Or for me, meaning that's where the reader is. When I try to picture who I'm talking to, it's who wants to come sit in that chair, and I'm going to address you now. And that's really crucial to me because it allows for a funny kind of open-ended intimacy in which anybody can be there who wants to come listen, but it's up to me to surround them. That makes any sense? Now you know I'm ready to hang. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here, Mark. My name is Liz. I'm a social worker at UVA Children's Hospital.
Hi.
Hi. So, a couple of things. I just, as you talk about your experiences and it seems to me that you are running this kind of inner dialogue all day long with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And as a social worker, I do the same thing. As I care for patients, I find myself sometimes having some compassion fatigue, if you will. So I'm wondering, for a poet, how do you reconcile that sort of constant dialogue where you're evaluating, measuring, thinking, taking in your environment, coming up with, this is what I want to write about. And then maybe, how do you then turn it off?
It's a really good question. Something happens to poetry when you just get too deliberate about it and too self-conscious. There's a thing that Leonard Cohen said, which I love. When you're sort of living well, imagine a candle wick. He said poetry just kind of burns off. It sort of appears out of your engagement in life when you're engaged, you're fully involved. And I think that's true, that if I can I make a poem out of this? Do I want to write about that? Why don't I do this? Then I start contriving things. But if I can kind of silence that a little bit and just be paying attention to what moves me, then it works. I think part of the dialogue that's really useful is challenging oneself. It looks like this, but is it? Is there another way I can see that? I understand that this person feels X, but wait a minute, is there another point of view about that? And that kind of internal questioning, I think, is really helpful to poets. It's not helpful to kind of wander around the world looking for your next poem. You sort of have to let it find you.
That's that inquiry that you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder, how do you take care of yourself, that mental, I don't know, that fatigue maybe that comes about of kind of, immersing your world in words all the time?
Right.
I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
I think I do. Really physical things, for one. If you exercise, that's a fantastic way to stop being in language so much, if you really can pour yourself into it. There have been times in my life when that worked for me. Visual art, music, the wordless is great tonic to people who live by words. It's one of the reasons that I love animals, because, you know, clearly there's an awareness, there's a sentience there, but it's not translated into language. It's such a relief. You know, look into a dog's eyes, and you can be very present with them, and there's no words coming out of there ever. It's a great thing.
Thank you.
Sure. I think hot baths are very good.
Other comments, questions?
Well, it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Would you share one more poem?
Oh,
with us
little one?
of your choice?
Sure, okay. I have this brand new poem, but I don't think I've even printed it for you.
That's maybe on the spot.
It's okay, just think about you. Now, what kind of mood are you guys in? Sort of wherever I want to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna take you to New Jersey, which is where I teach. And I was driving one morning through Jersey City, and I came upon a beauty shop, which apparently had just been set on fire. There was a little crack in the glass and a little lick of flame. Nobody around. It was Sunday morning. It was like, you know, below zero. I could hear sirens in the distance, so I know they're coming away. So I just looked and I just kept on driving. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And this poem began to assert itself, apropos of your question. And it's patterned after the house that Jack built, where each stanza ends with a repetition or a version of the same line. And each stanza is one line longer than the one before. You can hear it stack up, I hope. It's called House of Beauty. In Jersey City, on Tonelli Avenue, the House of Beauty is burning. On a Sunday morning in January, under the chilly shadow of the Pulaski Skyway, the House of Beauty is burning. Who lobbed the fire bottle through the glass, in among the creams and thrones, the helmets and clippers and combs? Who set the House of Beauty burning? In the dark recess beside the sink, where heads lay back to be laved under the perfected heads rode along the walls, the hopeful photographs of possibility darken, now that the House of Beauty is burning. The skyway beetles in the ringing cold, trestle arcing the steel river and warehouses, truck lots and Indian groceries, a new plume of smoke joining the others. Billow, dark thought, rising from the broken forehead of the House of Beauty. An emission almost too small to notice just now. Alarm still ringing, the flames new launched on their project of ruining an effort at pleasure. Glass jutting like cracked ice in the window frame, no one inside, the fire department on the way. All things by nature, wrote Virgil, are ready to get worse. No surprise then that the House of Beauty is burning. Though whatever happens, however far these fires proceed, reducing history to powder, whatever the House of Beauty made is untouchable now. Nothing can undo so many heads made lovely or at least acceptable. So much shapelessness given what are called permanence, though nothing holds a fixed form. Bring on the flames. What does it matter if the house is burning? Propose a new beauty, perennially unhoused. Neither the lost things nor the fire itself, but the objects in their dresses of disaster. Anything clothed in its own passage. Padded vinyl chair burst into smoky tongues. Lucite helmets sag to a new version of its dome. Our black bridge, a charred rainbow on iron legs, two ruby eyes glowering from its crown. If beauty is burning, what could you save? The House of Beauty is a house of flames. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We invite you to join us next week, on the 15th of November. We have a combined Vice Memorial Lecture at the School of Nursing and the Kopaka Family Foundation Lecture for the School of Medicine. We welcome Mary Naylor from the University of Pennsylvania, in a program called Stacking Stones, the Art and Science of Improving Care of Older Adults. Again, thank you to Mark Doty, and please note in your handout, He is giving us a trio of lectures on compassion, one on compassion for animals on the 14th of November, one on compassion for others on the 20th. These are all at 5 o'clock in the Harrison small auditorium in the Special Collections Library. The last one's on the 29th of November, also at 5 o'clock, on compassion for the world. You've shown us a wonderful sense of compassion today, and it's a lovely preview to that trio of presentations.
Those
So thank
lectures
you
are about
again.
the work of getting compassion.
Yeah.
You have to have it already,
Yeah.
Trying to find it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But thank you, this has been lovely.